All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be looking at the LSU Tigers 2024 preview and prediction. Looking at this coaching staff, Brian Kelly, 7 straight 10-win seasons under his belt. Pretty impressive stat that not many people are probably aware of. Offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock returns to Notre Dame, leaving it up to Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton. They've both been on staff since 22. Blake Baker, he returns to the Tigers after a stint in 2021. Obviously, he's accomplished many things in the past couple seasons with Missouri as a defensive play caller. Awful defense costs them a potential playoff appearance. Jaden Daniels, Heisman winner, leads us to the offense, Nick. The stats on screen are absurd. Over 45 a game, 543 yards per contest. I mean, these guys were just phenomenal. And we expected the offense to be pretty good for LSU last year, but I don't think any of us expected a Heisman winner to come out of it. I felt that Jaden Daniels, when he arrived at LSU, him and Mike Denbrock would be a really good pairing due to, him being a similar style player to that Desmond Ridder, a guy that Denbrock had a lot of success with. And, man, they blew the expectations out of the water, Nick. This passing attack was phenomenal. Obviously, they're going to go under a lot of reform here, though. Garrett Nussmeier takes over, and we're very excited for this guy. He's really shined when given the keys over the past couple of seasons. Throws with some legit heat, a big-time arm. Great ball placement, a confident gunslinger-like mentality. The arm talent does not waver on the run either. He can make plays moving backwards or under duress. I think he has a great deep ball. Certainly needs to work on his feet to be able to consistently generate max torque on his throws. 6'2", 205. His Heisman odds went up substantially following a great spring game, Nick. Nussmeier, he's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the country this upcoming season. No debate about that, even though they are losing, their top 2 pass catchers who went first round of the draft.
LSU loses a lot of talent on offense to the NFL draft, but they can sleep safe knowing that Garrett Nussmeier, a quarterback, is going to be a natural fit to plug him right in. Nussmeier looked really good during his previous appearances. Prior to last year, there was some rumors. People were speculating maybe there was a quarterback battle between Nussmeier and Daniels. You and I felt that was wrong. Obviously, Daniels went on to win the Heisman. Nussmeier steps in though, and he's ready to go. He's learned the playbook. He got another year of practice under his belt, and in the limited appearances last year, he looked really solid for this LSU team, stepping in garbage time as well as stepping in during some injuries that Daniels picked up. Daniels was a bit of a reckless player in college and would get the wind knocked out of him occasionally with some big hits, leaving opportunity for Nussmeier to step in. Nearly 600 yards passing on 78 attempts for him. Pretty solid number there, 4 touchdowns as well, 61% comp rate in limited appearances. I like Nussmeier a lot. I think he's a really solid player, really good in the pocket. I like what his arm can do. Really solid arm, great ball placement, high football IQ, 6'2", 205. I think he's got a good frame as well. I'm super excited to see what he can do with this new offensive play calling. Here they do lose Denbrock, who I thought was a really good coordinator for them, but they do plug in 2 new guys here that could be really solid and work with this offense. 543 yards per game was an incredible number for this offense last year. It's going to be interesting to see what the follow-up back to that's going to be.
Yeah, the new staff, Salone, he was with LA Tech from 2012 to 21, various roles as an offensive coach. He's been the QB coach here the past 2 seasons, pass game coordinator, being Hankton. He was with UGA in the past. He's been here since 22, of course. You look at his receiving room, Kyron Lacey, he'll need to play more X, but best as a slot. Good ability at the top of his route, some quick feet, high IQ, has had plenty of time to develop. Kelly's been impressed with him in practice. Seems primed and ready to lead this offense. They had C.J. Daniels from Liberty, a guy who's good at winning jump balls, good physicality at 6'2", 200, capable of fighting for extra yards as well. Pretty respectable blocker on the perimeter. He can haul in spectacular catches. A 1K yard receiver for them. Tight end Mason Taylor didn't exactly have the season I expected from him last season, but everyone else really blossomed, so it's hard to, find great production when everyone around you is, absolutely lighting up the opposing defenses. This is a guy who's a great athlete for the position, great hands and toughness. He can win contested catches. I think he separates on out routes pretty well. I think he's good in the open field as well. Chris Hilton, a speedster, he's going to be tasked with a larger role. Xavier Thomas from Mississippi State possesses good rate, speed of his own, contributed as a special teams return man as well. Aaron Anderson, an ex-high-end 4-star entering his 3rd season as CFB. Great foot speed, dynamic slot receiver, has sharp cuts, and should have progressed as a route runner. A good player that Nick Saban was always a fan of, obviously transferring over from the Crimson Tide. Shelton Sampson at 6'4", 190, isn't all that fast, but has good movement for his size. Kylan Bellot, top incoming wide receiver in this class, 6'3", 190, has some great speed. Overall, a group that won't garner much attention, Nick, but they have plenty of guys to throw it around to. If they've progressed to a solid tune, I think the upside is very scary. No elite first-rounders like they had last year, but I think this is a very deep group that I think more people will talk about. But guys like Anderson and Hilton, they've had to have progressed in this offseason for that to become a real thing.
Sure, LSU fans are probably upset and concerned that they lose Neighbors and Thomas, who combined for over 2,500 yards receiving and over 30 touchdowns between the two of them. Yes, that's a huge loss, but I do think this wide receiver room has some talented pieces that could step up. Yes, the names aren't going to jump off the page like Neighbors and Thomas, but this is a well-rounded room, top to bottom. I think Lacey's a good player, right? 558 yards receiving last year, 7 touchdowns for him. Good numbers there, 18.6 yards per grab. Mason Taylor, look for a bit increased role. Look for them to use the tight end a little more often this year. He's a really solid player. I like the frame on him as well. I think he's a big physical tight end who can really do a lot at 6'5", 245. You know, your prototypical tight end frame there with Taylor, 348 and 1 touchdown for him last year. Chris Helton, 225 and 2 score, 17.3 yards per grab. Solid numbers there. Aaron Anderson, he could potentially break out this year. I like the 2 portal ads there, and Daniels and Thomas. You know, Thomas coming over from Mississippi State. It's a slot in that Z. Daniels at the X, a really good jump ball specialist out of Liberty that I think has some nice footwork, potentially some good routes in his route tree as well. Nussmeier is a really solid quarterback, so working with these wide receivers throughout the offseason I think could really help. Mason Taylor, I think he's an absolute wild card. I think he can have a really big breakout season. I think he's primed for one right now. Look for an increased role, potentially more targets for him. I think this offense will be just fine in terms of passing game. I'm worried about the running back room. We'll discuss about in a second here. These guys are not, you know, the big names, like you said, that are first-round draft picks, but I think this is a very well-rounded group of wide receivers here.
Yes, this running back room is a bit of a concern. You know, Josh Williams returns a mean physical power runner with some great ball security. Likely not capable of carrying a big load, though, while being effective. You know, I think Caleb Jackson was pretty solid in his brief appearances. Plays with, you know, good elusiveness, can run between the tackles. And then true freshman Caden Durham, he was a top 150 recruit. Shows good juice as a runner, not all that physical, though. That's essentially it, Nick. Not much depth or scholarships handed out at running back this year. In terms of portal work, they lost 11 guys on this side of the ball and only added 3. No attention to the running back room, which is a little concerning for me because Logan Diggs, I thought, you know, he would have been a pretty good player for them this year. Obstacle to Ole Miss, which is an incredibly crowded room. And Jaden Daniels ran for 1,100 yards last year. Nussmeier is not going to do that, Nick. So this this rushing attack wasn't all that great last year from the running backs. Obviously, Daniels averaged almost 100 a game, so that really kept them afloat. But the number is incredibly inflated, and I think this is a big concern for this offense. And one more thing about Diggs is he's from the state, so to lose him to a team that's got a crowded running back room where you would have been the bell cow here, pretty concerning for me at least, and I'm not really sure what they're going to do at running back this year.
204.5 rush yards per game is very inflated by Daniels. You take away that, you're looking at closer to 100 rush yards per game. That would be a significant drop-off. You can expect a similar drop-off like that. Nussmeier's just not going to run the ball at the same click that Daniels did. Daniels also put himself into harm's way a lot when running the ball, so maybe some LSU fans are happy they no longer have to potentially wince every time their quarterback gets hit downfield. Williams, I think he is a good back, but I don't think he's going to be that number one back, right? He had 5 touchdowns last year, and also he had a receiving touchdowns of 6 total, 284 yards rushing plus 194 yards receiving, so he can be used out of the backfield. So Williams will take over and be that lead back, but I don't think he's going to get anywhere near the production they need out of him. Caleb Jackson's a solid guy as well. He had 4 touchdowns, unlimited touches. You like that. Losing Diggs is a big loss for an in-state guy to transfer to a rival in conference and a team that was already pretty loaded at running back like you alluded to. So that's certainly concerning if you're looking at this to see why Brian Kelly did not bring in a talented running back from the portal. There were plenty of options in the portal to bring in or just keep Diggs home at that point. Certainly concerned if you're an LSU fan. I'm not entirely sure what this rushing attack is going to look like. If they're averaging only 100 yards per game, that's going to severely hamper this offense that could be really dynamite, could really put them behind if they can't run the ball early on.
Good news for LSU is they have what I would consider the nation's top offensive line, led by left tackle Will Campbell, guy who's been a standout for 2 years now with great hands, really understands leverage, great power and athletic ability, a hard worker, great balance alongside his length, 6'6", 320. He will often lose hand fights if he doesn't land the initial strike. That's one of the only negatives right now. Allowed 0 sacks this past season. Emory Jones was also a starter as a true freshman, so the last 2 years he's been gaining experience, and he was significantly better this past year. He only allowed 2 sacks. He can really drive once landing firm in the run game. Needs to show that same grit more in pass pro, as he can get pushed back into the pocket at times. Has heavy hands, so he's hard to detach from, but he does get moved at times. 6'6", 315. Garrett Dellinger, he hasn't exactly emerged into a superstar like you once imagined he would, but he can play anywhere on the line. He's rarely penalized, very disciplined player, picks up stunts well, always has his head on a swivel. Nice base in pass pro. Showcase some good skill and movement in the run game. I like the effort. Needs to limit defenders making first contact in his chest, though, and has issues with length. And the thing here is DJ Chester. He was the top-ranked interior offensive lineman in last year's class. He's in a slot in the center now. Has overwhelming strength and violence. Miles Frazier ended up finding a home at right guard. He's 6'6", 335. Needs to improve as a meaningful run blocker, though. Had a great season in pass pro. In terms of depth, they're not all that impressive. They do have a guy in Tyree Adams, a 4-star from last year's class. Bo Bordelon as well, two guys they're confident in at tackle. Interior depth is certainly iffy, but if they're all healthy, Nick, this is a very good unit. A lot of size here, a lot of talent as well.
Fantastic, a really strong, big offensive line here. Will Campbell, a great leader at left tackle. Really have been impressed with his progression overall on this offensive line unit. Really good hands, 6'6", 320. Fantastic size for me. I really like him a lot. Garrett Dillingham, you can play him at left or right guard. Looks like he's going to pencil in at left guard right now. A good senior, good leader, a guy that's got a lot of reps so far. Solid player. Miles Frazier at the other guard, another good player who has a veteran experience. DJ Chester has continued to develop at center, a really solid player, a good part of that offense. Dillinger is a very disciplined player, good leader, keeps the offensive line in check. Emory Jones at right tackle. I like him a lot. Tyree Adams, you can move him around, potentially play him at guard if you need to. I think he's a really good, high upside, younger player on this offensive line. Top to bottom, I do like this offensive line. I think they're a really good unit that can help make sure the quarterback stays protected back there.
Offensive verdict, they certainly can't expect last year's numbers to be replicated with all the losses, but this offense can still be great when you have an offensive line as good as this one and the QB of as much excitement as Nussmeier. Development of this wide receiver group is going to really be key if the Tigers look to continue to produce explosive plays. Creativity in the run game to generate numbers is also something we want to eye down. Even if they do struggle to run the ball, I don't think this offense is really going to suffer all that much because they'll just throw it more. Nussmeier, he's fine with that, Nick. I think he threw it about 50 times in the bowl game, and they ended up winning that contest. So I don't think that's a negative one bit. Looking at this defense, a unit that drastically disappointed, Nick, and probably prevented them from winning a national championship game. 28 points per game allowed. Outside the top 100 yards per game allowed. Again, the portal, they only added 4 guys, lost 11. Kelly, pretty quiet in this year's cycle. Returning 6 starters, they lose 3 key components on the D-line. Thing here is they just allow too much free space, especially in the secondary. The D-line not filling assignments. Getting vertical on this defense just seems so easy. Way too much open space on the edge for the run. Quick passing game couldn't be stopped either. This was just an incredibly disappointing defense, especially since I thought they had probably the best D-line in college football. That was obviously a big miss despite the talent. Braden Swinson, a guy who's contributed for them last year, very valuable. For not just the Tigers, but Oregon in the past. He's been a good pass rusher, was good versus the run as well. Savion Jones was a quality run stopper, good producer at 6'6", 250 before arriving at LSU. Was a nice rotational piece. He had a career high in tackles. Needs to become more impactful, though. Paris Shand, a disciplined tackle, also needs to elevate his game. They do have a 5-star in last year's class, Deshaun Womack, a player who gets around the edge with a nice bend, good power to get through blocks. Kelly's happy with the edge unit. Defensive tackle is a different story, Nick. They have a vet and a local leader and 315-pound defensive tackle, Jacobian Gilroy. He has impressive strength. Should be a firm nose. Jalen Lee, second-year man from Florida, lightened up to about 307, making him a little bit more mobile now. Didn't play much last season, though. They added a nice player here in Gio Paz from Wisconsin, 6'3", 310, a sturdy, hard-nosed player they're going to throw into the fold. Sean Washington was previously with Georgia. He arrives via JUCO. He had prior connections to LSU, of course. Dominic McKinley, an incoming 5-star, is almost certain to find his way on the field. A guy with great strength that can shed blocks, really free things up at the point of attack. And Javier Suggs from Grand Valley State, who they just got a couple weeks ago, a pretty pro-ready body. They're going to throw him into the fold. They aren't all that concerned, considering they have different configurations they can run up front. That obviously includes Harold Perkins coming off the edge. But they disappointed last year, Nick, with a couple of guys that went to the NFL, and Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson. They lose those guys. Depth isn't all that great. They do have a couple of those 5-stars, but I feel like some more regression may be in store. But here at LSU, it just doesn't seem likely.
This defense was not phenomenal at all last year. 28 points per game is a very disappointing number, and it started with the struggles against the run early on in the season. They did have issues against that. They had trouble getting in the backfield as well. They do return some solid players. Savion Jones, 33 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks for him. Decent numbers there. Paris Shand, 17 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Good numbers for him as he got a bit of a rotational role. Swinson comes over here. He's a solid player, 35 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, plus 5 pass breakups. Likes to get his hand up on the line and block those passes, which is solid to see if you're a fan. Gilroy as well, 27 total tackles. Look to see a stepped-up role for him this season, trying to move him around a little bit at nose tackle. He's a big physical guy. Shown Washington potentially fights Gilroy for that spot at nose tackle. This front part of this defense was disappointing last year. They looked lackluster. Despite the high praise in the offseason and preseason, they really did look like they could be a solid unit top to bottom, but they struggled, seemed to be lined up wrong on several occasions. Looked to see, be uncomfortable trying to figure out where they wanted to go, what they wanted to do with this defense, and it really showed as the defense struggled to contain quarterbacks and in general contain the run early on. I'm concerned about this defensive line this year as they lose some solid talent in the NFL draft.
Yeah, they certainly just didn't produce like expected. 31 sacks was still a pretty solid number. Overall, though, Mekhi Wingo, of course, another player that's gone. Just very disappointing from them last year, and obviously led to a change at the defensive coordinator position. Blake Baker, a guy who's a great linebacking coach. They're going to pair him up with Harold Perkins, a guy who was really quiet early on in the year. He's obviously better suited to be an inside linebacker just because he has elite speed. He can track from sideline to sideline with intensity. Phenomenal athlete. The pursuit and closing speed. We went from being a patroller at the line of scrimmage versus mobile QBs, as a spy, to being, again, a versatile inside linebacker / edge defender. He was a good asset in coverage. After that slow start, he ended up producing very well. Should really thrive with added experience. This is a guy, obviously, it's just a video game, but in Madden, I was like, why is this guy an edge? Let me make him an inside linebacker, and he ended up winning a couple Defensive Player of the Years. And again, it's just fiction, but that's something he's certainly capable of, Nick, because those are real-life traits, the speed and the ability to be a versatile threat in the middle of the field, and I think that's certainly a position he should hone in on moving forward. Obviously, Perkins will look to be a full-time middle linebacker. They returned plenty of experience behind him. Greg Penn, a good diagnoser, has gotten better over the last couple years. West Weeks, great athleticism. Both of those guys are quality tacklers and run defenders. Whit Weeks, a guy who showcased fire and athletic ability last year. He looked sharp in his start. It's going to be hard to find the field in the 4.25, but a guy they, I think, need to get on the field, it appears. Brought in some 4-stars, Tylen Singleton, Devon Keys. Good group here of upside. Baker coaching them shows that growth should be even higher. I think this might be the best positional unit on this defense, Nick, in the middle.
This is a very good linebacking core here. Harold Perkins was used wrong at the start of the season last year. Just looked out of place. Didn't make a lot of sense, especially that Florida State game. You watched the film on that. He seemed lost out there, was really not comfortable with the position he was being utilized in. They ended up moving to a more natural position for him as the season went on, and it got a lot better. 75 total tackles, 13 tackles for loss, the leader on the team there. 5.5 sacks, also leader on the team there. 1 pick, 5 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles. A do-it-all kind of guy. Exactly what you wanted to see at him in the second half of the season. A slow start, but turned it around when he got utilized in his more natural position. I like Greg Penn as well. 89 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, plus 2 picks for him. Solid player, top to bottom. You can move him around the 2 weeks there. Whit Weeks, 49 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss. West Weeks, 16 tackles as a rotational piece. I think West Weeks could be in line for a solid breakout season as well at middle linebacker, splitting time with Greg Penn. I do like Weeks a lot there. I think he's a solid player top to bottom. This is a really good unit here in the middle of the defense. A lot of good players that have good experience so far. Only going to get better as time goes on. Nice veteran leadership. Definitely the best part of this defense.
And obviously looking back on a secondary that was, massively disappointing for them last year. Just got gashed. They're at one point dead last against the pass, I believe. 255 yards per game allowed. 64% completion rating. This just wasn't a very good defense of unit for them. And looking at who they do return, Sage Ryan played a lot of outside corner last year, spent most of his career in the slot. He was pretty admirable. Might look to move him back inside, though. Zy Alexander, a transfer from last year, was good in run support, showed some good ball skills. With a tall frame and long arms, they're going to need him to be more consistent in coverage, though. Ashton Stamps played a good bit as a freshman, was hurt, but, good and pressed when given the opportunity. Javian Telvano, a great tackler, was less than stellar overall, though. J.K. Johnson, ex-4-star from Ohio State, should get on the field this season. Overall, lots of youth in this back end, mixed results from a season ago. Jordan Gilbert from A&M, a loose athlete who has some good downhill thump, pretty nice at filling in run lanes, figures to get on the field in some capacity. Major Burns was a great tackler. Not as much in the open field, but was a late closer in coverage. Really needs to find better groove in that regard. Kylan Jackson was hurt all of last year. He was highly touted out of high school, though. Made some plays in the spring game they're happy with. He's going to be pushing for a starting nod. Overall, secondary was abysmal. Lots of busts that continued into the spring game even, Nick. Good upside with experience. Basically, everyone comes back, a new staff in place as well. That leads you to think that they might continue to struggle early on, but do you think there's much upside there? I know they picked up a guy from Auburn and Austin Auberry recently, but I think it's good that they have all this youth, and I think they certainly will grow, but, hearing them still struggling, even in the spring games, it's not a great look.
Definitely isn't a great look for the secondary. I think they will improve this year and look better. They do return some talented players who had tough years last year, but this secondary unit was poor last year. They struggled against the pass, and that was certainly part of their downfall. 118th in pass yards per game last year at 255 given up, which is a really high number for this LSU defense. Major Burns, your top leading tackler, 93 total tackles for him, 3 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups, and a pick. Good to get your top returning tackler back, Zay Alexander, 44 total tackles, 7 pass breakups, 2 picks. Good numbers there. Sage Ryan, 42 total tackles, 4.5 for a loss, plus 5 pass breakups for him. Javion Tovian, a solid player, 33 total tackles. Ashton Stamps, 23 total tackles and limited snaps, plus 2 pass breakups for him. So there's some nice returning production there. These are some solid tacklers. They struggled in coverage, a lot of bad busts, certainly a problem. If they can get focused in practice and really kind of figure out the playbook a little bit better, be better in those reads, read the quarterback a bit better, this defense could improve, certainly in the secondary side. But obviously the warning signs are still there, and I'm not fully confident based off what I saw in the spring game and film from last year.
The verdict on this defense, they were a flat-out joke on this side of the ball last year. With all the talent, they couldn't get anything right. Costed this team a national championship, I'd say. The D-line still has talent, but the depth is a little bit more scarce on the interior, meaning a lot of shuffling will be had. They'll need to create more negative plays to offset that. The linebacking group is great. Perkins is going to thrive with his secondary. We just talked about should improve a great deal. The confidence in that area will be quite low to start the year, I think, leading us to the prediction for LSU. This is a pretty soft schedule overall. LSU will certainly fall off on offense, but only from a production standpoint. I think efficiency is expected to be high as Nussmeier is going to thrive. I want to see this wide receiver group develop more chemistry, though, and I think they'll certainly blossom once they do. The run game certainly needs to try and find its groove behind what's likely the nation's best offensive line. This Brian Kelly team doesn't strike me as one that will contend for the SEC, but if they exceed the upside in certain key areas, then they can definitely strike, as, again, the schedule doesn't get all that tough until the second half, so plenty of time to get in sync. Once again, Nick, they do a great job of scheduling openers. They're meeting USC in Las Vegas. I think that's the biggest trap game for them because you look at USC's defense, they're losing a lot on offense, including their Heisman Trophy winner. And most people are probably not expecting USC to compete in this one, especially with this offensive line against that defensive front. Seems like a bit of a mismatch. And that's exactly where they seem to bite, though, Nick. Really, anyone in college football, when you downplay teams like that, they seem like they should not match up well one bit. That's why I think it's a big trap game, is because they're going to have a bit of a advantage, I think, in terms of the crowd in Vegas. And again, people are probably expecting them to kind of get blown out in that one. So that's an opportunity for USC to really shock LSU. I do see them losing to Alabama at home and then on the road to Florida, back-to-back games there. Only blemishes so far. 10-2 for me. I do have them winning at home against Ole Miss, getting payback from last year. I think, beating Oklahoma is an interesting game there that round out the season. At Texas A&M could be an interesting contest. At South Carolina and Columbia, playing in that stadium could be something that hurts them, especially if they're struggling with chemistry in this receiving core. I like the non-conference of UCLA as well, but even though, I'm kind of worried about some of these games, Nick, I don't see them losing many of them.
I have them at 9-3 right now. I do have them losing to USC, I think, for a lot of the reasons you just listed here. You spoke the praises of USC and picked LSU in the end. I'm going to take USC. I'm going to go on a limb and pick the Trojans here. I think they have enough on offense to win in a shootout in this game out there in Vegas, that is. I think they'll have a great fan presence. I'm excited about that one on September 1st. A really good game on that Sunday to kind of get yourself towards the tail end of that weekend. A very fun matchup. LSU, again, scheduling a really solid opener to start the season. Previously played Florida State the last 2 years. Now they get USC at a neutral site. Really exciting game. I do think the game at South Carolina is interesting to keep an eye on, but I think they will pretty much cruise in that game in the second half. I do have them beating Ole Miss as well. I am not as high on the Rebels as so many other people. I do have some concerns about what they're going to look like this year. That's an interesting matchup, though. And at home, Death Valley, I like LSU in that one. Alabama and Florida, I think those are 2 losses for this team as well. That's why they're at 9-3 for me. Alabama, we talked about them in a previous episode. I'm very high on the Crimson Tide. I think they're a very solid team in Kalen DeBoer's first year. And then Florida, it's tough to play in the swamp, and that's sort of a win that Billy Napier and company have to get. I think that makes a lot of sense at this point in time. At Arkansas, at A&M, you can look at that, right? A&M, definitely a tough place to play, but I think LSU has enough talent on both sides of the ball to win that game. In Arkansas, they're a very tough team this year. They're not going to play very good football under Sam Pittman, so that should be a pretty easy win. Oklahoma to wrap up SEC play. Bit of a wild card, Oklahoma. I think they're very much a wild card in the SEC this year. I feel a little interesting about them. We're going to look at them a little bit in depth later episodes, but I do think LSU will win that game. 9-3 for me. I think that's another very good season for Brian Kelly. Obviously, LSU fans want to compete for national titles, and I'm not sure 9-3 gets you in the playoff. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to all shake out, but LSU could certainly contend for a playoff if the defense plays way better than they did last year. Even if the offense regresses a little bit, I think it's possible there's a path to the playoff for the Tigers here.
think the final record for them will ultimately come down to the poise that they show on offense, because these are, the teams they should beat, again, at South Carolina, at A&M. But those are not easy road environments one bit, so the poise is going to be interesting. That's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. Appreciate you joining me. LSU, once again, looking to stay in the hunt for a national championship.
Very talented team down there in Baton Rouge. Looking forward to seeing what they can do with Brian Kelly in charge.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.